الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So we'll start again with talking about what can be used for tayammum. So the author says the soil used for tayammum, it must be pure soil. This can be sand, stone, gypsum, and so on. Allah says, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, or perform tayammum with pure sa'id. And then he says, and all the scholars of Arabic agree that soil, so he's translating sa'id as soil, refers, or it is whatever covers the earth, dirt or otherwise. So the author is saying that anything can be used for tayammum that covers the earth. So on this, there's a number of opinions on what can be used for tayammum. So there's two, or we can divide it into two categories. One that's agreed upon and one that isn't. So the one that's agreed upon would be soil that can be used for farming. So it's something that can grow, or something can grow in it, and it has dust. There's a consensus that it can be used because it fits the qualifications that everyone has set out of what can be used for tayammum. Then everything else after that, there's a dispute. So the first opinion is that anything that's so soil and anything similar to it. So it doesn't have to be fertile, but it can be soil, so it can be dirt, it can be sand, it can be rock, it can be marble, it can be anything that comes from the earth that takes that same, or that falls into the same category of dirt or earth. And that's the opinion of the Ahnâf and the Mâlikiyyah. Another opinion is that it has to be soil and it has to have dust. So this is the second opinion, and that's the opinion of the Shâfi'iyyah and the Hanâbilah. So the two other madhahib. And also from the Ahnâf, it's the opinion of Abû Yûsuf al-Ansârî. For the first opinion, and really for each opinion, this evidence is used. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, so tayammum literally means when you seek something out, or you go after something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to go after, or to seek out pure sa'id. So now there's two issues here. What is pure or tayyib, and what is sa'id? So the first thing that we'll talk about is what does the word sa'id mean, because this is essential to the topic. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to use the sa'id, so now we know, what is the sa'id? So the first is that what sa'id means is that it's only soil. And that was mentioned by Imam Shâfi'i rahimahullah, and it was also mentioned by Imam al-Azhari, who was from the scholars of language. And then they also mention a statement from Ibn Abbas. It's a weak statement that he said, or he explained. He explained sa'id as being something that is, or the best of sa'id is the farming and the dirt or the soil of farming, or land for farming. But this is a weak narration. They also mention a verse that talks about sa'id. Or that it talks about tayyib. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبْ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. Or vegetation comes from good land by the permission of its Lord. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here described or used the word tayyib in this verse to refer to the type of land which can be used for growing. So they use this and say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبْ, or that the good land, or the land that's tayyib, its vegetation comes out from it by the permission of its Lord. So then if we say, this is what tayyib means when it refers to a type of earth, then this must be what's used, or what we must restrict the word tayyib in the other verse of tayammum. So they say that it has to be soil that can be used for farming. And then they also mention this hadith that we talked about before, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, or the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, فُضِّلْنَا عَلَى النَّاسِ بِثَلَاثٍ جُعِلَتْ صُفُوفُنَا or جُعِلَتْ صُفُوفَنَا كَصُفُوفِ الْمَلَائِكَةِ وَجُعِلَتْ لَنَا الْأَرْضُ كُلُّهَا مَسْجِدًا وَجُعِلَتْ تُرْبَتُهَا لَنَا طَهُورًا. Or the Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, we were given three things that made us, or that were favors to us over the rest of the people. And then he mentioned the first, which was our lines. So the lines in the salat were made the same as the lines of the angels. And the earth all of it was made as a masjid for us, and its soil was made as a means of purification. And then the third, the author or the narrator says that he mentioned a third and it wasn't actually specified. So the point here is that in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ specified that the soil of the earth is a means of purification for us. So those who restrict it to soil say that we have the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبْ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ, or that the good earth or the pure earth, its vegetation comes forth by the permission of its Lord. So this shows what the word tayyib means, which is a soil. And then in the other hadith, which is in Sahih Muslim from Abu Hurairah, from Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said its soil was made as a means for purification. So they say if we use these two things, then we can see that it wouldn't include rocks, it wouldn't include sand, it wouldn't include marble or gypsum or any of these types of things, because it's not soil, which was specified in the hadith of Hudayfa, and nothing grows on it. Nothing's going to grow out of marble, or nothing's going to grow out of these types of things. And even if it did, off chance, it's not used for farming. It's not known as being fertile earth. So this is what they say, and then they also, this is the evidence that's used to show that it has to be dust, or that it has to be soil, and that it can't be anything else. Another thing that we need to keep in mind here is that some say that if something's mentioned in general or unrestricted, that this would take a certain ruling. So meaning that someone might say, well, didn't the Prophet ﷺ say that its soil was made as a means of purification? So this is restricted, so it would exclude everything else. However, those who say that it's not just to soil, that it would include anything that is from the earth, so which was the first opinion that we said from the Ahnâf and the Mâlikiyyah, what they say is, for us to say, well, we have a general and then a specific in this way, what we would need to say is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives a specific ruling to something, say for example that it's haram, and then in that group of things, one part was called halal, or that it was made halal for us, then we would say the restriction is general, but there's an exception to it, which makes it that's more specific, that permits one part of it. So for example here, some will say, well, we have the verse that says the earth, so meaning anything on the earth, and then we have something that says one type of the earth, so it meaning just the soil. We would say, or the ones who say that it's anything on the earth, they say, well, no, because if I say you can use anything on the earth, and then I say you can use its soil, is there a contradiction between them? No, I'm mentioning one part of them. So for example, another example they give linguistically. They say, if someone says, let's say he has a bunch of guests over at his house, and he says to his son, take care of these guests, or be generous to them. And then after he says, be generous or take care of so-and-so, and he mentions his name. Do we now say that he's not allowed to be generous or take care of the rest? Or do we say that maybe this person has a little bit of a more deserving reason, but all of them still fall under the other phrasing? Which would it be?
Obviously the second one.
Right, because there's no contradiction between them. But there would be a contradiction if he said, don't give any food to anybody in the house. And then he came and said, give food to Umar. Then we would say, well, this is a general statement. It means don't do it for anybody, but do it for this person. So now it's specified something. So in this, what the Ahnâf and the Mâlikiyyah say, we have the Prophet ﷺ saying that its soil was made as a means of purification. But it doesn't contradict the verse that says the sa'id, which is anything on the top of the earth, so anything from the earth. So they say at most this would show that the best thing to use would be soil, but we can't say that everything else is excluded now just because this one hadith says soil. And then they give an example from the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, حَافِظُوا عَلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. Or guard strictly the salawat and the middle salat. Do we then say that in this verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't talking about all the salat anymore because He specified one? Or do we say He's talking about all of them and the middle salat has a specific virtue or a specific ruling compared to the other ones? What would we say?
Would it be more specific, have a specific virtue, a ruling?
Right, because He told us both. The salawat, which is all five, and the wusta, which is the strongest, is asr. So this is what they say as to show that hadith from Hudayfa doesn't prove that other things are excluded. Another thing they use, and I think probably Sheikh Harith will get into these rules a little bit more, but we have when someone speaks, there's different things that a person's words can indicate. So for example, if I say, let's say, so if there's 6 people here, if I say to my son, give money to him, him, and him, what am I literally saying with my words? What's the explicit thing that I'm saying? What's something that's implicit or something that someone could imply from my words?
But don't give money to the other guys.
Right, don't give to those ones. Did I actually say that though? No. So is there a possibility that you guys would be included based on other things?
Yeah.
There's a possibility, but I mean the first thing that would come to mind is, okay, it's just these 3. So what they say is that this hadith, the hadith from that specifies the earth, it doesn't explicitly exclude other things. It's just implicit. While the verse is explicit, it includes everything. It's saying use the earth. So that's another way that they say that if someone said you can only use soil because of this hadith, there's 2 ways now. We can say, well, no, it's not general and specific. It just specifies one as being maybe better. And the other way is to say, well, no, there's actually no contradiction because this says this, soil, and this says the earth. So there's no contradiction between the 2. And then there's other arguments that they give that we don't need to go into it right now. However, then we need to talk about, well, when we said that some say that it has to have dust. And we talked about this before. So what they use is they use another verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, or then perform tayammum with clean earth. فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ مِنْهُ, and rub therewith, so meaning therewith from it, rub from it your face and your hands. So if I say, rub your face with your hands, that's it's something from the earth. So strike the earth and then rub your face with it. What would come to mind? Or what do you think they're using it this way?
Soil, sand, anything with dust.
But how are they taking it from this verse though? That it has to have dust.
Because when you strike the earth, you're not actually taking a substance to do. It wouldn't strike, like nothing should be left on your hand except dust.
Right, so they say that it implies that you're taking something, or something is being taken from the earth with your striking. So they say that this shows that the wording, or that the wording here shows that it needs to have some sort of dust. However, there's a number of ways to reply to this. So the first thing is we say the other verse in Surah An-Nisa doesn't contain this. It doesn't say min. It just says, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ. It doesn't mention anything. So we would say, if you're going to say it has to have dust, then we're saying the other verse doesn't mean anything. Or that the verse was pointless because we only needed this other verse. So this is what they say. And then they say that one thing that they try to argue is they say that in this hadith from Ammar ibn Yasir, when the Prophet ﷺ performed tayammum, he struck the earth, then he blew on his palms. If there was nothing on your palms, would you need to blow anything off of it? No. So they say, well, this is evidence that it should have dust with it. What's the first thing that we would say to that usage?
What's available to them wherever they work.
It's available, and also, how about from a more of a usul al-fiqh point of view? How would we, if we say yes, the Prophet ﷺ struck the earth, dust came on his hands, and he blew it off. What would we say to say that, well, this doesn't prove that it has to be dust?
Because if you blew off the dust and as long as you're using it to wipe space.
That's one thing.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it's not. But what if they say, well, he doesn't have to wipe his face with it, but it has to take dust with it? What would we say to that? Did the Prophet, when the Prophet ﷺ did it, did he just do it, or did he tell us it has to have dust?
No, he just did it.
He just did it. So how does that prove it has to only be that? Was he brought other soil and then he said, I won't use that because it doesn't have dust? No. Did he say don't use anything unless it has dust? No, there happened to be dust. There's something happening out in, we call it like, not out of coincidence, but there's something just happens to take place. Does that prove that now it's a condition that everything else is invalid? No, of course not. So that's the most obvious thing. If it was a condition, he would have told us. The fact that he just happened to use dirt that had dust and he blew it off of his hands, what does that prove that it can only be that type? So these are the two.
Sorry, it says in the book, before he did that, they were rolling around in the dirt. So he said, this is sufficient, and he ended up blowing on his hand. If anything, you could use you could also come back at that statement of blowing on your hand, as in that's just something he preferred himself. Because they were rolling around in the dirt, but he said this would have been sufficient enough for you, just to do that. So the dust has nothing to do with it.
Right, and someone can say, well, he didn't want to put the dust all over his face.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Because they rolled around in the dirt, and he didn't say that's wrong. He just said this is enough. And
right, yeah.
Was extra.
But always when we come back, if in the Sharia, if something is a condition, the Prophet ﷺ would have clarified it to us. A verse would have come down, the Prophet ﷺ would have said something. He wouldn't leave us to understand, well, this is out of all the earth, everything that on the whole face of the earth, the only thing we can use for tayammum is something that has dust, and all we're left with for that evidence is that he struck something and then blew his hands. So that means everything else is invalid. It's impossible that would be the case.
That's what I'm trying to say though. When they're saying they're rolling around in the dirt, we don't know what kind of dirt that is exactly.
Right. So then we say, well, if it wasn't specified to us what kind, do we have to then look? No. We just, it was dirt, it was dirt. Okay, then we use dirt. For us to say, well, what about the color? What about the texture? What about someone can then add all these other things and say, well, no, in Arabia, this is the soil that they have, and so it has to be that type. And someone can say, well, what's your evidence? To say, well, that's what the Prophet ﷺ used. The earth they have is dark brown. It has to be now. Well, then where does it end then? If we're just going on his actions.
Is there another narration that mentions the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam making tayammum without blowing on his hands and stuff, or describing it without blowing, including blowing?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. There might be.
There's another one from Bad al-Qutni. It just says pretty much the same thing, but he wiped up to the elbows. That's the only difference.
Yeah, and inshallah we'll get into what's the amount that has to be wiped.
No, I'm saying those are the only two hadiths mentioned in the book.
Yeah, it's not. There's not very much on in the book. So these are the first two opinions. The third opinion is that anything that's on the top of the earth, that's from the earth, meaning that it wasn't placed there, is permissible to use. So they say this would include any type of soil, sand, rock. They say it would include grass. They say it would include plants, anything like this, because if we say the word sa'id literally means whatever's on the top of the earth. That's what sa'id is, linguistically. So they say that included in this is grass. It's on the top of the earth. If it's a plant, it's on top of the earth. And they go as far as to say that if there's snow and ice on top of the earth that can't be separated from the earth to get to the dirt or whatever is underneath, that this would be permissible to use as well, because it's on the top of the earth. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, this is a sa'id, it's on top of the earth, it's tayyib, because it's pure, there's no najasa mixed in it, then it would fall under those conditions. And that's an opinion in the Mâlikî Math'hab, and some of the Zahiriyyah hold that as well. The verse that they use, obviously, like I said, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا, use or go to pure or tayyib or good sa'id. So linguistically, they say it fits both of these conditions. And that was mentioned by Zajjaj and Ibn al-Arabi and Abu Ishaq, and these were linguists. So they say that linguistically, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He gave us the Quran in the Arabic language, then this is the first thing we look to. If we don't have anything in the Quran or the Sunnah, then we go back to the language to say, okay, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to use this. What is the word? What is this thing that He's telling us to use? We look to the language. So we see that, and then even as Zajjaj and Abu Ishaq said that linguistically this is a consensus, so that all the linguists held that this was what the word sa'id meant. So they use this verse, and then they use the hadith that we talked about a number of times before. The relevant part to this topic is when the Prophet ﷺ said, so that it starts, أُعْطِيتُ خَمْسًا لَمْ يُعْطَهُنَّ أَحَدٌ مِّن قَبْلِي أَوْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ قَبْلِي. I was given 5 things that none of the prophets before me were given. And then the second one that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, وَجُعِلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضِ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا, or that, and the earth was made as a masjid and a means for purification for me. So this hadith just says the earth in general. So plants, grass, whatever's on the earth, that's part of the earth. It falls under this hadith. Also they say, the Prophet ﷺ said, the earth was made as what? Which 2 things? Masjid and what? And purification. So, do we then say that you can only pray on dirt, you can't pray on grass? No, we say this hadith tells us the whole earth is 2 things, a masjid and a means of purification. So they argue that anywhere that you can pray, which is the whole earth, you can also use it for tayammum, because they were both mentioned, and the earth was made as these 2 things for this ummah. So they use these evidences. And then they also say that, in this hadith is narrated by al-Bukhari and it's from Jabir. So they say that this was general. And then they say that in the Ghazwa of Tabuk, they didn't carry any soil with them. So they just went out. And so they were no longer in that area where it was fertile land, because we know the stories in the Sirah where there was no water and it was a barren land. So obviously it wasn't farming land or anything like this, but we know that they would have performed tayammum. It's impossible, because otherwise we would have a hadith that said they didn't perform tayammum or perform wudu. And then they also mentioned the verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَإِنَّا لَجَاعِلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَعِيدًا جُرُزًا, or He said, which means, and verily we shall make all that is on it a bare, dry sa'id. So here in Surah Al-Kahf, bare land or barren land that can't grow anything was called sa'id. So this gets rid of the condition that it has to be something that you can grow on, or that's something that's fertile. So this is the third opinion. The last opinion, and it's very short, is that that they say that only soil and sand are allowed, and that it wouldn't include rocks. So it has to actually be something that is resemblant of sand. It's not a hard substance that takes, that's a large chunks of things, and that's the second opinion of Abû Yûsuf al-Ansârî. So what they say is that we have specific evidence for soil. Sand is very much like it, so it would fall under that. But what is sand? What is actual sand? It's small rocks. It's been ground up. So really, it falls apart then. So unless we say, well, it can only be used if it's ground up rock, or if you took a rock and then smashed it up, you could use it. But if it was still in one hole, then you couldn't use it anymore.
Maybe they need something that you could rub, because you could rub sand kind of, but you can't really rub rocks.
You could, yeah, except for we don't actually pick the thing up and rub it. So you know what I mean? Like you just. Yeah. So they could argue that, but then we would say to them, but what difference does it make if you're not rubbing with it? Because we even knew the Prophet ﷺ blew any like that, just even the substance that was left over, he blew it off of his hands. So he wasn't rubbing it with his, or he rubbing his face and hands with it. So Allahu A'lam, if we look at all of this evidence, to me the strongest opinion is that it's the third opinion, that anything on top of the earth that's from the earth, so it wasn't put there, so someone doesn't take a chair and put it on the earth and say, I can use the chair now because it's on the earth. No, it belongs to the earth. It was from there, so whether it's dirt, rocks, sand, grass, whatever, anything that belongs to the top of the earth, that would be the strongest opinion, because the verse is clear. It's about sa'id. If there's a consensus of the scholars of language that sa'id is anything on top of the earth, whether it's grass or anything like that, and then we have the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ where he said the earth itself was made, and then he put them that the earth is two things. You can pray on it and you can use it. So if we're going to say, well, no, you can pray on grass but you can't use it, then we need something very specific to prove that. And I know it's a very, someone might say, well, that seems like an odd opinion, but again, we follow the evidence. And like I said, it's not an opinion that was never taken before. It's one of some of the Malikis took this and some of the Zahiriyah, and this is linguistically what we have. So inshallah we'll stop there, and then next week inshallah we'll go into I think it's how to perform tayammum or the things that nullify tayammum. Allahu a'lam.